Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, Aging Without Fear. I'll be your host for this morning. My name's James Wiltshire. I'm the Executive Director of the DCM Institute, and I'm exceptionally proud to have been asked by the Retirement Village Residents Association of New South Wales to help them with hosting this webinar for residents and their families today, and again for operators later this week. The purpose of the webinar is to go through the findings of a research project that the RVRA undertook with the funding from the New South Wales government on psychological elder abuse in retirement villages. Today, we have curated a number of speakers on the subject, both from the RVRA and from the sector, as well as some academic speakers as well, to explore the subject of psychological elder abuse and the results of the research project that had been conducted earlier in the year. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the ongoing connection Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have with the land. We recognise their unique and diverse cultures and the significant contributions they've made to our society. As I said, today we're meeting to discuss and present on the findings of research conducted by the Residents Association of New South Wales. Again, this piece of research has been funded by the New South Wales government. And before we get into the content of the findings of the research, we have a short video from Cathy Townsend, who's the Director of Fair Trading, just speaking on the research.
Hi, everybody. My name's Cathy Townsend. I'm a Director with New South Wales Fair Trading. I'd like to start by commending the RVRA for its initiative to undertake this survey. I know you've heard a lot lately from the New South Wales government about its commitment to improve the experience of tenants in New South Wales and people living in defective strata buildings. But it's important to know that we haven't forgotten about retirement village residents. I'm pleased that Fair Trading could contribute through its sponsorship program to allow this very important work to be undertaken by the RVRA. Clearly, a key consideration for anyone choosing to live in a retirement village is about having an improved sense of personal safety, together with support when it's needed, and of course the camaraderie that comes from living with your peers with shared interests. This is the first report of its kind that focuses solely on the experience of retirement village residents. As the RVRA present their findings to you, I'm sure you'll see that there is a role for operators, for government and for residents themselves to prevent psychological harms through elder abuse. I implore you to consider these findings and to consider what role you may have to support and protect yourself and your neighbours. I look forward to continuing the long-standing and productive relationship that Fair Trading and the RVRA have built, and we look forward to working together to improve the lives for people living in retirement villages. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your patience with that. Always good to get the technical difficulties out of the way early in the piece. We'd also like to thank Cathy for her kind words in that video that she submitted on the research. I'd now like to introduce Craig Bennett. Craig is the President of the Retirement Village Residents Association, and before retiring, Craig worked in investment banking. He's held a number of board positions, including company secretary, and is also a volunteer chaplain in the aged care facility. I've found Craig to be very passionate about this space and a great advocate for retirement village residents, not just in New South Wales, but across the country. And I'd now like to invite Craig to say a few words.
Thank you very much, James. It's a pleasure to be here. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. I would like to make a few initial observations before we head into the meat of this subject of psychological elder abuse of residents in retirement villages. Firstly, who is the RVRA? We are the only organisation in New South Wales devoted solely to protecting the interests of residents in retirement villages. What do? We advocate for government, we lobby all the stakeholders, the property council, the operators, whoever can be of assistance or whoever can be any way helping us as we protect your interests. We inform, we support, and we educate, not just our members in retirement villages who are residents. We also support and educate family, the managers, operators, and many other bodies. All are involved in this sector and all are significant stakeholders in the sector that need to understand what is going on. So why are we here? Over the past year, we have seen many more calls coming into our call centre regarding elder abuse, particularly psychological elder abuse. We didn't have this category a couple of years ago. So now we looked at it and we thought, well, is there any analysis that's been done? And there wasn't. So we put this survey together. Its findings have given us a snapshot, and that's all it is, into what is happening within these villages, and they are the subject of these discussions today. The study has had many people involved, and I would like to thank two parties in particular. The Department of Fair Trading. They got behind this initiative and provided the funding for this project. And we put them under time pressure and they performed. They did exceptionally well, and we are grateful for their support. Secondly, the many operators and managers for the assistance given in the widespread distribution of the survey. It would not have been as successful without your help. To name just a few of the larger ones, we have Anglicare, Aveo, Levande, Living Choice, Oak Tree, RSL, Widden Group, and I could go on and on. And I could name a lot of individual managers in single villages as well who helped. So what happens now? Well, we'll talk to that at the end of the webinar, but going forward, and as Cathy Townsend has said, the RVRA will be working closely with government and a number of peak operator bodies to determine what areas of improvement can be made across the sector to help residents, managers, resident committees understand and mitigate all forms of abuse in retirement villages. I do hope the information contained in this webinar and the report is useful and possibly to some extent eye-opening as you participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig, for those welcoming words. And certainly I'm sure that operators, residents and village managers are excited to hear what's to come as we go through the presentation of the results for the rest of the webinar this morning. And in saying that, I'd like to invite now Roger Pallant to present very briefly on what the motivations were for the RVRA in conducting this research. Now, prior to his retirement, interestingly, Roger was an avionics engineer with the RAAF, and that was for 22 years before moving into human resources, as well as doing consulting in the disability sector. Roger's actually a resident of a retirement village and has been for the past 7 years, where he served on the committee for the last couple of years. As I mentioned before, Roger is the secretary, so he's a board member of the RVRA, where he's been for 3 years. And it's now with great pleasure that I invite Roger to speak for the first time, as Roger will be speaking, then coming back to us a little later to go and do a more of a deep dive on the results. But Roger, do you like to share with those on the call? And I think looking at the numbers, it's fantastic, by the way. I think we've got over 150 people on the call at the moment across New South Wales. Maybe if you could share with everyone, what was the motivation really for the RVRA looking at this subject matter?
Yeah, thanks, James, and welcome everybody. It is so pleasing to see so many people, and hopefully we can share some news with you that is of interest. What motivated us last year, New South Wales Fair Trading put out some grants, and we thought, oh, we should have a go at some of those. And they're available for not-for-profit organisations such as us. One of the target areas was improving and raising awareness of resident protection. Although they called it consumer protection, we changed that to resident protection. And it was about that tackles a particular high risk or harm issue. And that fitted our key objectives of supporting RVRA members with issues of concern. We had 10 days to get our submission together, and we needed a topic. How hard could this be? we were going to find out. Little did we know that this was going to be much more complex and time-consuming than we thought it would be. At this time, elder abuse in aged care was getting a lot of media attention, and we had been receiving an increasing number of calls from our members regarding elder abuse in their village, as Craig has already pointed out. However, elder abuse is a broad topic and includes financial abuse, neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and psychological abuse. Too big an issue for us to take on, given that we're all volunteers and we're on a shoestring budget. Recent studies in Australia found that psychological abuse was the highest reported form of abuse compared to all the others. And the New South Wales Elder Abuse Toolkit defines psychological abuse as harassment, intimidation, threatening behaviour, patronisation, and verbal abuse. We decided that asking questions around psychological abuse were appropriate for the retirement village environment. So our plan was to develop a survey to see if any of the five psychological abuse types occurred in retirement villages, and if so, to what extent and what was the impact on people. We submitted the grant application and we're fortunate to be successful. We're very proud that this survey is the first to have been conducted solely within retirement villages, and hopefully it will be the catalyst for some meaningful change across the retirement village sector. I look forward to sharing the findings from the report with you all in a short while. Thanks, James.
Great. Thank you, Roger, for those words. And we'll have you come back in a little bit, in a couple of minutes' time, to really do the deep dive into what you found in your research and the findings of the report, which has been out and about for the last week and a bit. I'd now like to invite Associate Professor Julie Pallant to address the meeting. Julie recently retired from Melbourne University, where she was Director of Research and Graduate Studies in the Department of Rural Health. Previously, she worked as a Senior Lecturer in Applied Statistics at Swinburne University, teaching graduate subjects in survey design and data analysis. Julie has a PhD in psychology on the topics of stress, coping and wellbeing. She has worked as a counselling psychologist in a variety of educational and government settings, and was employed by Monash University as a lecturer on the graduate psychology program. Julie is now retired from her academic and consulting work and is kindly giving us some of her time this morning to talk on this rather important topic. She too is retired in a retirement village in Ballina and is quite enjoying her time there, she tells me. Now, Julie, this is from a psychological point of view and your own background. This is quite a serious topic we're talking about with psychological elder abuse. And I thought it might be good, before we deep dive into the findings with Roger in a few moments' time, maybe you can share with us some of the effects of psychological abuse, just by way of educating those on the call on what some of the signs are to be looking for.
Thank you, James. And it's good to be able to talk about this issue, because it is a very serious issue. And living in a retirement village myself, I'm just aware of having so many people together can sometimes result in conflict and, abuse, whether it's intended or not, it can be an issue. So psychological abuse is very important because it's serious and it has long-lasting consequences. And this is particularly the case for elderly who may have existing health conditions. It can affect people's thoughts, their emotions, their physical health, and also how they behave. In terms of its psychological effects, it can result in people feeling helpless or out of control. That may result in poor self-esteem, increased stress levels, and they can dramatically increase the risk that an individual develops anxiety and depression, which certainly affects people's quality of life. It affects people's ability to think clearly as well. They may become confused or have difficulty concentrating, and even can affect their memory. The physical health impacts are also quite severe. Symptoms such as headaches, changes in eating, tummy problems, even high blood pressure can also be impacted by abuse. This ongoing stress, particularly as in the survey, we found people had this for quite some time, it may worsen pre-existing health conditions, such as chronic pain, heart and lung conditions, and diseases like cancer can also be impacted. Now, unfortunately for people living in a retirement village, when they experience abuse, they may actually withdraw from social activities. That may be to avoid coming in contact with their abuser or to try and avoid situations where it may occur. This in turn can also result in further risk of depression and other mental health issues in the longer term. So it's certainly a very serious issue that needs to be addressed, both in the short term and the long term, to help improve the quality of life of our residents. So Roger will be going through some of the detailed results of the survey, and I'll be back later to have a talk about how some of the, the coping strategies people can use to cope with it. So thank you, James.
Great, thank you, Julie, and thank you for running us through. As you said, I think this is quite a serious topic, and it might be one that a number of people on the call probably don't know how to explore and navigate. So I think it's going to be really interesting once we get through to the other side of the results to do a bit of a deep dive with yourself and others in a bit of a panel discussion. Now, speaking of the panel discussion, and before I invite Roger back to share the results, for those of you that are looking at this webinar across New South Wales, and I think we've got a few interstate as well, which is fantastic to see, you'll notice there's a Q&A button that you can access. If there's any questions you'd like to submit to the panel when we get to that stage, or any questions you have on the research, please use the Q&A function. While I do have some prepared questions for the panel, which will come shortly, we're really keen to answer any questions that residents and their family, I know there's a few managers on as well, might have about the research. So please don't be shy. The Q&A function is there. You're more than welcome to use it, and we are able to see the questions that you submit through to us. I'd now like to invite Roger to return and join us on the webinar. And Roger, what I'd like to do now is hand over to yourself to do a bit more of a deep dive into the survey results. And I know you've put together a bit of a slide presentation. I should also say that we are recording this, so you will be able to get a copy of this for attending, and that should be up online. I can see Roger's just flicking back to his starting slides at the moment, so I might just give him a moment or two to get on top of that before handing over to him formally. So yes, please use the Q&A function. I will be monitoring that during Roger's presentation. And Roger, I'll now hand over to you to go through the Aging Without Fear survey report summary of findings.
Okay, thanks, James. And it's probably a good thing that I start at the start and not at the finish of the slides. So I'm not sure how that happened. I'll put your seatbelts on, folks, because we've got a bit of a journey to go through here. And what I'm going to do in the next 10 or so minutes, take you through the key findings from the report. And some of those are eye-opening and very interesting. So the journey so far, and it has been a journey, this is the biggest project that we've undertaken to date, and definitely one of the most important. And as the RVRA board member responsible for this project, I've found at times it was very difficult and disturbing, some of the reports that I was receiving to abuse. I was the person who received all of your responses, and for about 4 weeks, I was the only one who could see what you were saying and what your comments were. And I was monitoring that on a daily basis. And some of your stories were really, I felt your pain, I felt your anger, I felt your frustration. And it motivated us to say, well, we have to do something about this. This report is not about blame or finger pointing. It tells a story that needs to be listened to and action. And it's good news to be able to report that the operators are taking this seriously, and we are going to have further discussions with them about where do we go to from here. We feel compelled and obligated to do something with this information with a goal to mitigating the serious issues, and we will do something. This comment from an anonymous female, 80 to 84, living on her own, epitomizes the whole topic. She wrote this: "We are all doing the best we can, to cope with life as an elderly person, and certainly don't need to be spoken to as if we are a child. Please, everybody, a little kindness and respect helps from all of our society. Life can be lonely, frightening, and very confusing at times. We have lost so much of our independence and control. We just need to feel we are still real. And to me, that's what it's all about. And that's our motive for doing something positive. Okay, who completed the survey? We got 1,259 respondents, which to us is brilliant. I remember when we got to 100, I rang the board, I sent a message to the board, hey, we've got 100, how good is that? Let's go for 200. Then we got 200, then we got 500. And then Diana, Vice President, said, hey, we're going to get 1,000. I said, no, not going to do that. And we got 1,000. And then suddenly when we closed it, 1,259 respondents, which was absolutely brilliant. Females made up 61% of the sample. And the majority of the sample fell in the 70 to 84 year bracket. Just over half of the sample were living with someone, 55%. And most had lived in the retirement village for less than 10 years. And just over half of the sample are living with somebody, 55%. That means 45% of people are living on their own. We need to have a balanced view, because the report from this point on talks about those people who commented about abuse. However, there were lots of comments from people who said there was no abuse. I'm fine and I love living where I am. I've met some lovely people and wonderful friends who live on either side of me. Everybody respects others' right to privilege or privacy in this village. Everyone in the village I live in treats every other resident with respect and courtesy. I've always felt safe and well cared for in this village, and always treated with courtesy and respect. Staff and fellow residents are extremely friendly, helpful, and always there for each other. So they're all the positive things, and that's 60% of the respondents. So we're now focusing on the 40% of respondents who reported some form of abuse. Over 40% reported experience at least one type of abuse, and the proportion of females reporting abuse was higher. Over 40% for females and then for males 34%. The percentage of younger age groups in the sample reporting abuse was much higher, 48, and the younger age group is under 80, where compared to older groups over 80, 28%. Let me just try and get my screen out of the way. There we go. Now I can see it all. The most common source reported for all types of abuse, except for being patronised, was fellow residents, with over 70% of respondents indicating residents as source. So, folks, we're the problem, and we need to do something and consider that as part of our solution for mitigating this. For those respondents who indicated they've been patronised, however, 69% specified management as a source of that type of abuse, and this category included village staff, the manager, and head office. Here's another quote from a person. An example of our operator attitude. A couple complained about excessive noise from the upstairs unit and was told, don't worry about it, you'll be deaf soon anyway. Now, I imagine that some of you had a little snicker, a little laugh, and oh yeah. However, put yourself in the shoes of these people, middle 80s couple on the second floor and having health issues, and the upstairs neighbour makes a lot of noises all times of the day. This is their house, and for the operator to speak to them like that was out of line. Residents Committee. Residents committees or someone within the residents committee was reported as the third highest sources of abuse. Unfortunately, the RVRA receives quite a number of calls about residents committees operating outside the spirit of the Retirement Villages Act. Another comment. I am mostly suffering anger and frustration at how the friendship and peace of our village has been shattered by this residents committee. And that's an anonymous person, female aged between 75 and 59. How often and where did the abuse occur? For each type of abuse, over 2/3 of respondents indicated it occurred on multiple occasions, with the highest figure of 77% for harassment. Abuse, across all abuse categories, the most frequently reported place the abuse to occur was in the social and common areas of the village. Folks, this is happy hour. This is our morning teas. This is our bingos. This is our trivia nights. This is where the majority of abuse occurs, in the common areas. Impact of each category of abuse. The blue is no effect. The middle red is mild effect, and the yellow is the major effect. You can see for being harassed, threatened, intimidated, and verbally abused, people suffered major impact for each of those categories. For the patronised one, it was less. Here's another comment. I was admitted to a mental health clinic to get some respite from the unhappiness within the village. That's for females 75 to 79 living on her own. Psychological symptoms experienced. The most commonly reported symptoms of abuse were depression, helplessness, isolation, fear, and anxiety. Respondents who reported having been threatened showed the highest level of symptoms. Feelings of isolation reported by 31% of respondents experienced intimidation, 29% of those who were harassed, and 28% of those who were threatened or verbally abused. Low self-esteem was reported by 1/4 of respondents who had been threatened, verbally abused, or harassed. Another comment. I was surprised that it affected me so badly. I felt so ashamed, like a small child being told off at school. Another female between 70 to 74. What actions do people consider taking? A high percentage of people experienced abuse and considered leaving their village. That was their first option, or their first thought of, how do I remove myself from this situation? I leave the village. 57% of those who had been threatened considered leaving, closely followed by 47% of those who were intimidated, 46% who were verbally abused, and 40% for those who reported being harassed. Response to the abuse. This was really concerning to me and very difficult to take at times, that 13 respondents, 10 females and 3 males, were so upset about the abuse they experienced that they considered harming themselves. Most of these people are under the age of 80. And all of these respondents had experienced 4 or 5 types of abuse. It gets a bit more personal because I had the chance to speak to one of these women when I had dinner with her about 2 months ago on a village visit. And she explained to me what was going on. And in her words, it was abuse by the manager at her village, and she felt she had nowhere to go, no one to talk to. She felt that the only avenue of escape for her was to take her own life. And she tried, but was unsuccessful. Her evidence is hard. She's right. And we are helping her to deal with that issue. And she's now feeling better. I've spoken to her since. She's feeling better that she has someone who listens and cares for her. And we're doing that. Other findings. The common response to abuse was to withdraw from activities in the village. For all types of abuse except intimidation, the most common response is they did not seek help. So they kept it within. For most respondents for those respondents who indicate they had sought help within the village, and the most commonly reported help source were the manager and other residents. It's important to note that people turn to the manager, and we've got a webinar on Thursday talking about managers, and we will raise that issue with them, because if they're approached for help, how do they react? Are residents aware of the village's elder abuse policy? There's legislation out that says that every retirement village has to have an elder abuse policy, not just have it, notify people they got it, publicise it, it's there, make it available, etc., etc. However, over 2/3 of the sample indicated that they were not aware of the village's elder abuse policy. That's not to say it's not there. That's to say that they're not aware of it. And I believe now we'll have that discussion on Thursday. It's up to the manager to promote that more widely. So a big thanks. Thank all of you for filling out the survey. Craig has thanked the key operators, and I do say, I spent a lot of time talking to the key operators and asking them to distribute the survey, distribute the webinar invites, etc., and they did that. To Diane, as the Vice President, kept me focused and sane, to the board for their input and support, and to my expert gurus, Julie and Dr. Jason. And finally, DCM and James for donating their time and expertise to organise and run this webinar. And to conclude, all of us as residents have a role to play. We need to consider our actions and words and the impact that they may have on someone. We need to help those who are not as good at helping themselves. Sometimes we need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, am I the problem? And I go back to the first comment. Please, everyone, a little kindness and respect helps from all our society. Thank you. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Roger. And can I just say that having kind of been on this journey with you from the outside looking in from the time you first told us about this research, I know that you've taken a real personal interest in not just collating this report, but really reading all the comments and concerns and the stories that came through from residents across New South Wales. And I know that you've mentioned to me a number of times just how confronting some of that was. And I know that it wasn't really a question, but a comment did come in from someone on the call saying how much they appreciate the work that you're doing. And I can only echo that from someone in the sector, not a resident, but someone in the sector who's gone on this journey with you. So I think you should be very proud of the results you just presented, and hopefully it does open up a wider conversation with residents, with operators and with government. And speaking of conversation, we're now going to move to a panel discussion where we've got a number of people joining us. So I'll be asking Julie to return and answer a few questions. We also have Dr. Diane Hart, a retired academic and has been a retirement village resident for almost 9 years. In addition to serving as a member of her village's residents committee, Diane is also a member of the Retirement Village Residents Association, where she has been a board member for 2 years, holding the office of Vice President for the past year. And Roger just mentioned how Diane helped keep him sane through this whole project. So we welcome Diane onto the call. Joining us, we have Tamara Rasmussen, who's the Head of Retirement Operations for Keaton, which, as many of you know, was formerly known as Lendlease. Tamara's been with Lendlease and now Keaton for the past 19 years and has over 25 experience in property and the retirement industry. Her wealth of knowledge encompasses everything from community management and sales to operations and development management. Tamara is responsible for the day-to-day operation of Keaton's 76 retirement villages and resorts, and with over 17,000 residents and more than 600 staff, Tamara is passionate about creating a culture of kindness, respect and fun at Keaton. And it's certainly a pleasure to have Tamara on the call. I have heard firsthand the way she talks about concerns with resident welfare as well as interactions with staff, and it's great to have her joining us for this panel discussion on the call. The first question that I'm going to put will be to Julie, and for those people on the call, I'm just concerned that, you know, going through some of this research that Roger's taken us through could be quite confronting. And Julie, from your experience, if people are experiencing abuse, what would you suggest that they do?
Well, one of the first things is to seek help. Doing it on your own is really tough. You can get in your head and it's very hard to get it out. So seek help. Now, we saw that some people are reluctant to seek help from managers, but please talk to friends, talk to family, talk to other residents, and actually have somebody help you on this journey, because it won't necessarily be something that'll be resolved quickly. Many times things drag on and, you know, that it's a long-term process. One thing to keep in mind, though, too, is that the impact of any event, stressful event, depends on two things. One is the actual event, and one is what is going on in the person's mind. How are they interpreting the situation? How are they responding to it? So we need to sort of tackle it on two fronts. One is to try and reduce the impact it has on the person. And then the second part is to look at, well, what can be done practically to actually change the situation. So in terms of what's going on in your mind, one thing to be aware of is, how are you interpreting the situation? Are you reacting to it? Step back a little bit and say, what's really going on here? Because sometimes I've found when a person feels like they're being abused, we can really react to it. You know, we feel like it's a threat. But is there something else going on? Because when we live in a place, well, certainly where I live, lots of things are happening for lots of people. And, you know, sometimes people can be very upset and they may lash out and they may say things they regret, but they may have just been diagnosed with cancer. They may be having difficulty in their relationships. They may be having all sorts of things going on in their lives that we don't necessarily understand. So sometimes the abuser is also suffering. Now, that's certainly not the case all the time, but it can help to have a little bit of a step back, if you can, from the situation. And talking it over with friends and family can help you do that. You know, they just get a little bit of perspective on it. If you're very emotionally affected by it, it's really important that you seek professional help as well, because stress, anxiety, depression, it can exacerbate many of the health conditions that our elderly have. So it's not something that you should just sit in your home, withdraw from all social life, withdraw from people. It's really important that you still maintain your quality of life, that you get out there and you do things that you can do. Now, in terms of solving the problem, you know, that needs to be dealt with fairly carefully, because, you know, what's the problem? Who can help you with it? Who can you go to? Sometimes going to people in the village is the first point of contact, the manager. The residents committee can sometimes be very helpful. Sometimes you might need to seek help from external sources, from your doctor, a counsellor. You may need to get some legal advice. The RVRA, for its members, provides a very important role where people can ring up confidentially, they can get a bit of background, a bit of information about what rights they have, how other people might have had to deal with situations like that in the past. So reaching out is a really important thing to do. And if you're a bit uncomfortable with that, get a friend or another resident to help you with that so that you've got that support. And through it all, maintain whatever self-care behaviours you can. And what I mean by that is look after your health, you know, look after your eating, your sleeping, your exercise, joining in with activities that you enjoy. Try and distance yourself a little bit from what's happening in the abuse and make sure that you try and improve the quality of your life, because you need to be balancing those two things as you might be trying to tackle the problem. But please don't suffer alone.
I think that's really interesting, Julian. I quite like how you said looking after yourself is very important as well. So just putting in sort of your own behaviours to just look after your own mental and physical and psychological health. But I just wanted to come back while I've got the focus on you very quickly. You mentioned professional help. Now, if I don't know what that looks like, what does that look like? When you say professional help, what does that actually mean if I'm on the other side of this, just trying to navigate my way forward?
It can be a challenge, particularly if you haven't had to seek help before. If you're feeling suicidal, if you're feeling immediate help is needed, there are agencies like Lifeline, and I know Diane's putting up some information later on about that. So that's emergency. If you're feeling that down at night, that you've got yourself in a state, then reach out like that. But generally, if you do need to find a professional counsellor to help you learn some coping strategies to deal with the anxiety and depression, starting with your GP is a good place, because they can often refer you. They will often have lists of people who are available in your community. And for some residents, you know, they've shifted from their normal location to shift into a retirement village. So start with your doctor. You can also ask around. You'd be surprised the network that people have. I've learnt so much from other residents in my village about where to go for what sort of help. So yeah, there's certainly some of the points of contact that I would start with to find out where to go to get your particular needs met.
Great, thanks, Julie. Tamara, I might and go to you now, sort of representing the operator on the other side of this. And it's a privilege to have you on the call. I know that I've heard you speak of this before, concerns you've had with, behaviours in and around villages. As an operator, you've got a team of village managers that are feeding up into you. You're responsible for a whole lot of residents. What are you hearing on the ground, and how are you communicating with your managers on how to navigate some of these concerns?
Yeah, thanks, James. I'm very passionate about this topic, and I have spoken on numerous occasions about it. I'm passionate about this subject too, because abuse affects everyone at a village. It doesn't just affect the person who is being impacted, it affects the whole village. I do want to commend the RVRA, James, just before I start, to actually tackle this topic takes courage. And I do want to commend the RVRA for actually taking on this subject and for following through and for having this open and honest conversation about abuse and what that looks like at villages. I think to hearing from Roger, I've read the report, but hearing how he's been impacted personally by the responses really brings it home. How, yes, this is confronting, but this is sad. For me, this is actually really sad, and it's a sad reflection, unfortunately, on some of the behaviours that we do see in villages, and not just in villages. We see it in society in general. We've all gone to the bank and seen the signs around respect and being respectful. We've all seen it at Coles and Woolies. It's naive if anyone thinks that it isn't happening. It is happening at villages. Again, I'm terribly saddened that there is abuse around resident-to-resident abuse. Your retirement age should be the best years of your life. Everyone has the right to live without fear of bullying, harassment or intimidation. So the fact that that's happening, but also too the fact that there is evidence of, village managers talking down or belittling residents is absolutely unacceptable. So look, from a Keaton perspective, I'd go back to what we do. We put a lot of focus on supporting our village managers to be able to have the conversations that lead to identification of potential abuse, but also to how to have difficult conversations when they are aware that there might be sort of resident-to-resident disputes or resident-to-resident committee disputes. So there's an enormous amount of training that our teams participate in. They also do participate in the DCMI training. They participate in the Property Council retirement living training as well. But they also, too, to Julie's point, do participate in dementia training as well, because sometimes some of the cause or the source of that behaviour may be a decline in sort of cognitive ability. So the teams are very supported when it comes to how they can deal with these situations. I will say too, as an employer, and I've got a lot of staff, psychological safety of my team is paramount. So at Keaton, we do have our own staff wellbeing manager. So his role is to really support our team and to make sure that we as a business are making sure that we're giving them the tools, the resources they need to have a psychologically safe environment to work in. But James, absolutely, from our perspective, it is happening. And I think we all have to tackle this because we can't have this kind of abuse happening at villages.
Yeah, I think everyone shares those sentiments, Tamara. So thank you for speaking them up. Certainly, we're all very proud of this sector and what it offers. And having spoken and met a number of residents over my years in the sector, everyone's very proud of their home. And this research does draw some attention to the fact that there are circumstances where not everything is rosy. And certainly we need to see this as an opportunity to have a tough conversation as a sector, have a tough conversation with our colleagues from the residents' perspective, from operators and government perspective to really move the needle forward. While I've got the spotlight on you, Tamara, I'm just really curious that one of the stats which I found was really interesting was it was 2/3 of residents said they aren't aware of their operator's elder abuse policy. And as we know, that's actually something that came through with the most recent batch of reforms. So government, I have to give them credit, did identify as this is something they wanted to be in front of by way of encouraging and almost forcing operators to have policy. So as Keaton, how do you talk to your residents and create awareness about the fact that you do have policies in place on this subject matter, that you do have procedures in place on this subject matter? There might be some residents that are in villages that, you know, aren't under your remit. And hopefully it might encourage them to have conversations about, well, hang on, you know, hey, if Keaton's doing it, what are we doing in this space? So how do you talk to it with your residents?
Yeah, James, look, I think very clearly the research has found that we're not doing enough to promote it. So the fact that the majority of residents aren't aware that we've even got a policy, but it's not just the policy too, it's what that means. You know, having a policy is one thing, but really for residents, what does that mean for them? What are the resources that's available to them? To Julie's point, where do they go for help? So I think as an industry, we absolutely have to improve that awareness and education of what the elder abuse strategy is and how meaningful and relevant it is for residents. Look, we again, to comply with the New South Wales legislation and the rules of conduct, it is available on the notice board, it is available in the library and the communal areas. We actually took the opportunity to roll out a national strategy. So when the rules of conduct did come in, we actually took that and expanded it to all of our villages in all regions. So again, we see this as a really important part of making sure that we do have the right structures and support at villages to be able to give residents and also to our staff the tools to help them to identify when there are instances of abuse, the types of conversations to have, and then where to go for help. Separately too, we do have refresher training sessions with our teams, but when it comes to residents, I think we probably need to do a lot more in terms of raising that awareness.
Yeah, great. We've got a number of questions coming in and I'm going to go off script a little bit, Diane. So if you just bear with me for a sec. Julie, I just wanted to come back to you very quickly, mainly because someone might have sort of missed Roger's introduction. Do you want to do just a very quick definition of psychological abuse? It's one of the questions that's come in and I thought, you know, we've gone through the research now, we've spoken about a few examples. It might be just a quick moment to take a reconciliation of what psychological elder abuse is.
Okay, well, psychological abuse is any behaviour that is directed towards a person who may result in feeling uncomfortable. They may feel harassed, intimidated. They may feel they're being patronised. So it's behaviour that results in potentially some psychological harm to the recipient. It's a difficult topic because it's slippery. What I think of as being, for me to feel abused, may not be seen by the abuser to be abuse. And I think that's where the conversation needs to start, that, you know, we need to look at how we all behave in relation to other people in our villages or in our community. What is the impact of what we say? It might be a joke. You know, people might think they're just being funny, but in fact, it can be very humiliating for a person, you know, to be talked about in a certain way. So, yeah, it's a slippery topic, but it's basically any of those behaviours that may result in the person experiencing some psychological effect.
Yeah, great. Thanks for covering us back on that. I think it's always good just as a bit of a reminder. Diane, I'm curious from the RVRA's perspective, you know, sort of what are your views on, I think you get drawn into these conversations or these concerns a bit from residents. You're a member-based association at the end of the day. So I'm going to ask this in two parts. How involved can you get as an association with some of the stories that you're hearing versus how involved should the manager or operator get, noting that sometimes you might be dealing with resident-to-resident concerns, as Roger highlighted, but you know, there might be times when a village manager is involved. How do you triage that as an association and provide advice and guidance to others?
The RVRA finds that management and operators are generally very, very reluctant to get involved. Some of the larger operators, as Tamara says, they have strategies in place. But the smaller ones very often don't, and individual managers really struggle with involvement in disputes of any kind, and abuse in particular. So we get to the RVRA, we get 2 or 3 calls a month that are specifically about elder abuse. And we answer a lot of other inquiries that also where elder abuse is mentioned as well. So it's more prevalent than you would think. And usually the problem includes the complaint that the resident went to the manager and the manager told them that they couldn't get involved. But under the legislation, of course, as we know, they have a duty of care. Management has a duty of care to provide a safe environment for all residents. And also, as Tamara said, the village elder abuse policy is something that is also legislated for. And so that policy that requires the managers to be able to identify and respond to elder abuse and give guidance to the residents on services and strategies that might be available to them, that's not being done in a lot of villages. Not that some of them don't have policies, but they don't display it. And the notice board is required, and they don't make it generally known to residents that they are there. So as an association, the RVRA would like to see managers receiving a little more support and training to deal with abuse specifically. We understand it's a very, very difficult and sensitive part of their role, but training and resources would help. How involved can we get as an association? Unfortunately, our residents live in independent living. And we find that as the average age of residents is increasing, so does their lack of independence. Many of the abused also have long histories of being victims of abuse. But reaching out to the RVRA is often that first step. And that's that first step towards self-help. So when we receive a call from an abused member, we talk to them about the abuse and we give advice and support, but we're not trained to intervene or to mediate or to provide psychological assistance of any sort. So we refer the members on to other organisations who can help them. We're not service providers. We often find, however, that just by being there and providing a sympathetic ear, and that's sufficient to help the member move towards seeking professional help. Did notice that during the 6 months that we've been dealing with this survey and report, that people who were involved in it were becoming increasingly stressed. It's something that we have to be very careful of as well. As untrained people, we need to take Julie's advice as well and make sure that those of us on the board of the RVRA that hear these complaints and problems from our members don't get so involved that we forget our own psychological health. So it's a very fine line that we've been treading in the last 6 months.
I think that's a really good thing to draw attention to. I know yourself and Roger have taken a lot on in preparing this, and sometimes you can feel the weight of the world is on your shoulders. So you're certainly doing an admirable job. Tamara, I'm curious, just picking up on something Diane said. This report is going to put this subject matter, in the front of minds for a lot of residents, and might be something that we raise when we've got the operators on the call on Thursday. But I think it'd be good for those on the call today to know, what conversations are happening in the sector. So I'm going to ask now more, you're a leader in the sector, you're on the Property Council's Retirement Living Council in New South Wales. Are the discussions happening now that you've seen the report about the next steps and supporting, knowing that if this does get on the forefront of minds of residents, it might actually bring up some past legacy issues or ongoing issues, and how is the sector preparing to move forward?
Yeah, James, I will say that we started talking about this, to be honest, as a committee years ago, I think during COVID. I remember you might have been on one of those committee meetings. So we have been talking about it for a long time. I think that the report that the RVRA has commissioned gives some good evidence. So we never had evidence. It was always anecdotal. But this does give us some good evidence to then, as an industry, working with the RVRA and others, to go, this is what we need to do now that we've got this evidence. And I think there's some great recommendations in the report that we need to workshop as an industry with RVRA, with the Property Council, and then as a joint, I guess, combined front, go and lobby government for whether it's support or whether it's funding or whatever it might look like, so that we can see some changes. Because, as I said, abuse, harassment, intimidation, it affects everyone at a village, and we need to have strategies to be able to stamp this out. And I might just pick up on something Diane said around the village manager, because any good village manager will always intervene, will always be there to support residents when they come to them. It's a fine line too, because often those village managers are the trusted, or the trusted member of the community. And I think Roger might have mentioned that before. So the village manager too needs to, almost be impartial or independent often. And so if there's another means to have mediation or some other avenue for residents to go to, then I absolutely would support that. The other thing I'd say too is I have seen some really great examples of where resident committees identify bad behaviour and they get involved, because there's some really great strong leadership, and they work with the village manager and the operations team to be able to almost divide and conquer and go, how can we work together to stamp out this bad behaviour? So again, I think it affects the village, but it also takes the village to come up with solutions to stamp out this behaviour.
Yeah, that's some really good points there, Tamara. Thank you. I think I'm looking at the time and realising it's getting away from us on an hour webinar. And I think, to be honest, looking at the questions I haven't had a chance to get to, we could probably fill another hour, to be honest. So Diane, you might have to take an action, as we might need to circle back around to this as a later point with yourself, Julie and Roger. But Diane, I'm going to throw it to you now. When we, what are kind of the next steps? Where can we go through from here? So I know you've prepared a couple of slides just to wrap all of this up in a bow with the next step. So I might give you the floor to sort of bring us home before any concluding remarks.
Okay. Thank you very much, James. The RVRA finds that management and operators are generally reluctant, as I said before, to get involved. And so we really need to start thinking about where people can go for help. If you don't feel confident in approaching the manager, for example, or your fellow residents, who can you turn to outside the village? Only a small number of respondents sought help outside the village in this survey. Your friends, your family might be a possibility, but most people turned in that case to their family doctor or legal practitioner. But there are outside organisations who provide help, and we have a list of some of them on the screen. They're also in the report and in our leaflet. So for legal advice, you can go to Seniors' Rights Service. They provide legal advice on retirement village issues, including elder advice, and they can refer clients onto other bodies, such as the New South Wales Ageing and Disability Abuse Helpline. The helpline is just one of these outside bodies that will offer you free and confidential support, information and referrals, and you can talk to a counsellor who will help you find a meaningful way forward. But if the matter requires crisis support, Lifeline is one of the organisations that you could turn to by ringing them on 13 11 14, and that puts you in touch with a confidential one-on-one support from a trained operator. And if you want to access a service provider, the Compass website, which isn't on our screen, but is just the Compass, COMPASS website, gives contact details for a range of services and service providers, such as Dementia Australia, Men's Line Australia, and OPAN, the Older Persons Advocacy Network. That's just naming a few. So we at the RVRA give advice and support for our members who experience elder abuse, but we're not service providers. So if we could look at the next slide, the recommendations, summing up the recommendations that came from this report. There were 3 of the 4 recommendations that are looking at providing training and information, because this is vital. So recommendation 1 was to develop strategies within retirement villages to mitigate abuse. And we've heard some of these today. The greatest incident of abuse are between residents. So we need to provide residents with an awareness and information of what is inappropriate behaviour when they're dealing with their fellow residents. We need to make sure, for example, that new residents are given behavioural information in their welcome pack, that information's posted on the village notice board and discussed at meetings. One of the most telling results, as we've heard, was that 2/3 of the responding residents didn't know about their village elder abuse policy. It may have existed, but they weren't aware of it. So an effort needs to be made to make sure that policy is well displayed and available to all residents, particularly when they enter a village. And the other one that's important there too is the village complaints and dispute resolution procedure. Recommendation 2 was to develop specific information for residents committees. Residents committees are very important in a village. They're the conduit between management and the residents. But in the survey, we found that a lot of sources of abuse had been the residents committee itself or someone within the residents committee. So information sheets on elder abuse and dispute resolution are being developed by the RVRA, which will assist resident committees. Some of these resident committees then can be very helpful in assisting abused residents. The other thing that residents committees can do is develop their own code of conduct, and that'll give members of the residents committee a fair indication of just exactly what's expected of them in meetings and their day-to-day communications with residents. The third recommendation was that sector stakeholders review current documentation and training. And by sector stakeholders, we mean the government departments such as Fair Trading and other organisations that are involved in retirement villages, such as the New South Wales Property Council, village operators and their staff. And management in particular were rated the second highest source of psychological abuse, most commonly patronisation. And conversely, management were also found to be the first port of call for residents who are experiencing psychological abuse. So clearly managers need support through documentation and training. And at present, the majority of our managers, but particularly, as I said before, in the smaller villages, just have very little confidence when it comes to dealing with abuse. So we need a collaborative approach to be taken within the sector to review the current elder abuse and dispute management documentation and training for its adequacy in preparing managers to deal with abuse incidents. And lastly, the recommendation 4 is to improve and enforce legislation and establish a sector ombudsman. Is that present legislation that we have effective in providing the means of dealing with abusers and ameliorating the effects of abuse on the abused? The elder abuse policy is an important tool, and with the dispute resolution policy, it needs enforcing in villages. Mandatory training needs improving. The powers of the operators that the operators have under the legislation to remove residents who are abusers also needs strengthening and enforcing. And also having problems dealt within the village community via mediation is a much more effective way of dealing with abuse than waiting for the matter to be swept under the carpet or to escalate to the point where outside intervention's needed. And ageing residents are very hesitant about undertaking that sort of outside intervention, such as the tribunal, because of financial, social, and in particular the health and emotional stresses this generates. So the time is probably right now for the appointment of an ombudsman or some form of disputes resolution officer in the state to settle many of the disputes involving the issues affecting our rapidly expanding older population, including those in retirement villages. And this is a conversation we're continuing to have with government. The Ageing Without Fear survey findings provide information regarding instances of psychological abuse and the impact this is having on residents in retirement villages. And those results are going to help the RVRA to develop training and information materials regarding strategies for coping with abuse, and of course, where to go for help. If we look at the next slide, I'd like to draw your attention to the RVRA website in particular, www.rvra.org.au. This provides general information and a dedicated member section for access to more detailed information on life in a retirement village. And finally, I'd like to thank everybody who has attended today and thank DCM for their assistance in this venture of ours. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Diane. And I really do mean that. I think thank you from yourself, Roger and Craig, in really leading the way in bringing this research to fruition and putting the subject matter on the table for us to discuss. And I think what's been really pleasing from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that the conversation around this topic is as respectful as we'd expect the relationships to be between residents and managers to be in the community. So I think there's an opportunity to lead the way and have the conversation both as a sector, but also to lead by example on how we think conversation should happen within the communities where we're hearing some of these stories of concerns. In wrapping up, I just wanted to, again, I want to thank everyone for their time. We've had over 150 people on this call today, which has been fantastic. I know we've gone a little bit over time, so thank you for hanging in there. I would like to really thank our panelists today. I'd like to thank Kathy for her video at the start of the call from Fair Trading, Craig for his kind words, Roger for his hard work in pulling this together, Julie for her clinical views, which has been most welcome, as well as Diane and Tamara for joining us this morning as part of the panel. There are a number of questions that were submitted. I do thank you for that. I know we didn't get a chance to get to all of them. I think we would have gone for another hour really with some of the questions that were coming in. But what it's telling me is there's a real appetite to continue to discuss this subject matter as an industry, both between residents and managers, between residents and operators, and together with government, and really lead the way in improving the lives of older Australians living in retirement villages across the country. Just so everyone knows, for some simple housekeeping, the research paper, the findings, is on the RVRA website that Diane just shared, so you're more than welcome to get a copy of that after this call today. The video recording of today's webinar will also be online in the next few days, and I'm sure we can have a chat with Roger and Diane about sending an email alert, letting everyone know when it's online and available to see. Just as a general curiosity, we're presenting the findings later this week at a call for operators and village managers. It's going to be a very similar call, and I'm sure it'll be a very different discussion though when we get to the Q&A, and I think it's a discussion that we certainly all welcome. So in closing, I'd just like to thank you all for your time today. You've all been very patient with us as we've gone through the research, the findings, and had a discussion. Again, thank you to our panelists, and I look forward to following how we talk about this subject more openly in the future to benefit residents in villages, not just in New South Wales, but more widely around the country. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.